Extract from the 582nd Official Contact Conversation from March 1, 2014, translated by FIGU-Carolina.
Our folks all live in a democracy of freedom and peace, consequently, no comparison can be made to that which happens on the earth. Thus very great efforts must persist in order to bring peace to all the countries and folks of the earth. If the same circumstances are to apply as in our case on Erra, therefore no dictatorship, no enmity, no despotism and no other gewalt-dominance of any kind may prevail, rather only a purely democratic, folk-deciding authority. Every empire and kingdom as well as every republic, even if they name themselves democratic, correspond to nothing more than a dictatorship, because solely those who have might in these systems can dominate and even determine with gewalt and coercion. For that reason I must say, like you have even mentioned that very often already, that Switzerland is also no actual direct democracy, because so long as solely and exclusively the folk cannot decide, that is, do not have the first and the last word in all concerns, like you have once said that, rather that certain things only the government decides, like also diverse parties have different views and in obvious matters advocate different interests, so long can a direct democracy not become spoken of, but rather only of a part democracy. With what I am explaining, I cannot, may not and do not want to interfere in the politics of Switzerland, because with my explanation I am only making clear what we pledge and understand by direct democracy and how we handle it in this wise. In addition, it is to be further said that our system recognizes a world government, which demands general democratic forms from all countries and folks, like however also that absolute peace and freedom must prevail for the folks and the individual human beings, and that thus no wars or other hostile actions against each other may take place. Furthermore, an absolutely free transportation of goods and persons is given on all of Erra, in which case in this regard extreme care is taken to ensure that no floral or faunal seeds or even plants, like however also no faunal forms of life, become transported from one area to another, like sadly is the opposite case on Earth due to the stupid and unreasonable globalization, through which a lot of damage is caused and through which all sorts of mischief will be caused in the future. Therefore, there are no customs borders at all for persons and goods for us on Erra, and every human being can go where they want without being controlled by officials and so on. Now, despite the fact that everything is free and open, each land area has its own borders, which are respected unifiedly entirely by all folks and are not violated. In spite of the world government, each country and folk governs themselves, and indeed independently according to their own customs and traditions, in which no rules of the world government are given, because this only has the right to ensure that our world value system is consistently maintained in regards to peace and freedom and the legislation on the planet, as well as in regard to the handling with the governments and folks of other planets. In regards to the ordinary and special legislation for all necessities of daily life and of the life is uniform across countries and folks and is geared towards absolute humanity, justice and equality of all human beings. Consequently, therefore, only one identical law and application of the law worldwide and for all human beings is valid. Therefore laws and regulations cannot be bent what you once called vague paragraphs and vague laws in relation to terrestrial laws etc., as it is the case in the legislations of all states of the earth, which are partly also severely criminally inhumane, as for example in relation to torture and the death penalty. And as far as the mixings between our folks are concerned, so it has to be said that such only rarely occurs in this way when family members of various folks form alliances among themselves, which however is actually extremely rare. The rule is that the individual folks and the predominant groups of folk remain among themselves and therefore neither mix nor change their customs and traditions through other cultural influences, This contributes to maintaining the health status and all the characteristics of each group of folk, which contributes to the fact that diseases no longer appear, or if they do, then only extremely rarely. The whole of this non-mixing of folks also contributes to the fact that no diseases and epidemics are spread, as well as that one part of the folk does not get into any difficulties with another part of the folk, and indeed neither in regard to foreignness or race, nor in regard to goods, products or languages etc. Since, as a rule, the family members of the folks remain among themselves with only very few exceptions in the case of very rare mingling partnerships, no folk mixings and xenophobic and racial conflicts with other folks or between families and neighbors etc. arise. And what is also extremely important is the fact that we know no sorts of religions and sects, as well as no different political parties and directions. All pleasure in Iran folk communities are alone and uniformly inclined to the creative natural laws and recommendations which are taught through the spiritual leadership. As a result, there is no hatred of religion or sects, nor religious or sectarian rituals, rites or any kind of disputes among us pleasurean. Ultimately, what is very important to say is the fact that all of our folks are in accordance with their overall cultural behavior and as a result of legislation, as well as with respect to the creational natural laws and recommendations, there is no prostitution. In regard to the democratic referendum of folk, everything is regulated by us in such a way that all folks, that is, their populations, are connected by information technology to the center of the world government as well as with the authority of the respective folks, yet who on the one hand, like however also from propositions from the authorities of the folks or individual persons, prepares propositions and agenda items and submits them for the evaluation and election from all populations. In this regard, all folks or their populations are requested to be present for a certain time, 3 hours before a vote or a ballot, as you say in each case, at the appropriate machines for a ballot or several of them, which are installed everywhere publicly and in homes for voting. The arising matter being brought to the ballot will not be officially announced until precisely 3 hours later, when the populations are present at the voting machines. The announcement of the ballot agenda, whereas invariably only a single item is dealt with at a time, results in the wise that all advantages as well as all disadvantages are mentioned and extensively explained. Only after that, when all the facts of the positive and negative have been stated, the time of reflection and reconsideration of the presented voting agenda begins, for which a period of about 30 minutes according to your concept of time is firmly set, during which the human beings of all populations can electronically express their opinion, that is to say a yes or no, which is naturally automatically registered and enumerated. In this wise it is given, that no rebellious gatherings of persons can take place in order to bring about mass influence. Consequently all those voting persons must express their own opinion. In this wise all electoral agendas of any kind will be handled, and indeed also in regard to the appointment by persons to the world government and the folks' authorities. Additionally it still must be said, that the world government and the authorities are no more and no less than democratic representatives of the folk. These democratic representatives exercise only the oversight in regard to the keeping of the laws and regulations as well as of the resolutions of the collective of folks, together with the forces of law in order assigned to them accordingly, although they have no gewalt of self-determination whatsoever, while the determination of all matters and things lies solely in the might of the planetary or folk-based population. The world government and the authorities of folks may thus never act otherwise than as determined by the planetary or folk-based population.
Then the entire thing is based on some kind of internet. However, what happens if crises and emergencies occur, which require a quick decision and a quick action?
According to your understanding, you can call the entire thing thus, some kind of internet, and when a crisis or emergency occurs, which then requires a quick decision and a quick action, then the whole planetary population or the respective responsible population of the concerned folk is called to the voting devices, and indeed in the form of a general mobilization alert, where only 1 hour is allowed for the activation. Such situations are however more than extremely rare. Consequently, such a mobilization last took place 2 decades ago.
However, can that take quite a long time until something becomes regulated, if such a case of a mobilization occurs?
Such mobilizations can indeed take up a lot of time, although crises and emergencies are extremely rare, as I said earlier.
And who then guides and leads the entire thing in such situations? And of which kind are such crises and emergency situations, normally?
They are carried out and dealt with through the spiritual leadership who are entrusted with the matter, and indeed in cooperation with the world government and the world's population. If it deals with planetary things, if it only concerns things in terms of countries, then the authorities of the relevant folk and the corresponding populations are asked about it. And in regard to the crisis and emergency situations, these can be very different, like for example in regard to an intervention of order, when such an intervention is demanded from an area of a folk or a whole planet of the Pledgerin Federation. Also extensive assistive actions with one or several folks or even with a whole planet of the Federation can be possible, for example in case of imminent dangers from space or natural disasters, etc.
Then, with regard to Erra, are there actually more foreign, that is to say, other planetary situations than such situations that apply to Erra and its population?
That is really the case, because on Erra we have, within living memory, no more crises and no more emergency situations to record, neither with regard to natural events nor in view of the population.
How beautiful, that should be so upon the earth. If I now however correctly infer from your words, then at least not all in the Pledgerin Federation stand in such a high level of development as all of you Pledgerin, or am I mistaken? Are there perhaps still folks in the Federation who are somehow unpeaceful and cause problems?
You are not mistaken, because although we Pledgerin make every effort to keep everything in peaceful form throughout the Federation, various folks of the Federation are still always subject to regrettable unsatisfactions and therewith also armed conflicts, which sometimes, however only rarely, require our intervention. However, any intervention on our part must first be approved by the consent of the Pledgerin population as a whole, with the for and against thoroughly debated and weighed out, as our democratic voting formulas demand. The work of clarification in this regard is performed by expert spiritual leaders and powers of order, which also have the corresponding foresight skills, in order to predict what will be the effects from the causes that are taken.
And what about when many people speak up? Is there not confusion? And if I think that the whole world population is involved, then
great care is taken to ensure that there is order and consequently no Azardungeon manifest. Therefore, in every case, consideration is given to what is said and done, so that there is no kind of chattiness and the individual persons who have something to say are not interrupted if their objections and contributions are relevant and in accordance with reason. Thereby the rule applies that only short and concise objections, clarifications and suggestions as well as the listing of possibilities and necessary courses of action etc. are made. Talkative ones, who want to carry out talking marathons, unfortunately exist, but every such rant is interrupted and the word is passed on to the next person who has something to bring forward. It is not permitted for several persons to talk together, that is not allowed. Consequently there is no mix-up in this regard. So it can take quite a few hours, even 2 days or in some circumstances several days, before a fully rational solution is reached and voted on, which is useful and satisfies the arising crisis or emergency problem.
Long speech, short sense, is what we say here. The thing with the leaders having long speeches without actually saying something substantial, that is sadly also with us on the earth, thus in the politics. Also in our group this comes to expression every now and then, because even with us not everything is perfect. Some human beings just like to hear themselves talk. However, it is a pleasure to hear that this problem does not only exist with some of our group members as well as with the politicians and with the people of our terrestrial folks, but also with your population. If I now understand correctly, then it is with all of you in such voting conversations, campaign conversations and action conversations, because in my opinion it really deals with such conversations, therefore no talkativeness, rather only reasonable words, explanations, trade deals and wises of behaviors are offered opportunity.
That is so. Every speech marathon becomes stopped, and every incidental problem of any kind must be quickly, well and efficiently dealt with and a solution must be supplied. Therefore, may nothing be put on the back burner, like you care to say sometimes. Furthermore, it is right what you say, that long speeches often result only little or no sense at all, rather only lead to endless and fruitless discussions, through which much more unclearness than clearness and valuable decisions arise, because no effective solutions can be found. Good and right decisions come about only through concise, terse and therewith unequivocal and clear as well as suitable words of rationality.
That is also my opinion. If I have understood correctly, then the whole of your democracy could be understood in a similar way to a democratic Landsgemeinde, as we still have in Switzerland in the cantons of Glarus and Appenzell, although, beforehand, no propaganda that is advertising for a matter, with regard to the election process, may be made, as is the case elsewhere in the aforementioned Landsgemeinde in Switzerland. So that no mass influence can take place with all of you, also that no riotous gatherings of people can take place. As you have said, the election agenda will only be openly mentioned just before the election, and because the time for the election amounts to only 30 minutes and so each person relies in practice only on him, herself and on her own opinion, no folk-wide, culture-wide, and political party election propaganda can occur. Also as a result, no party system and no party dictatorship can occur. And I find that fair, good and democratic.
That is correct. In this wise we operate a direct democracy, which also prescribes in every respect, that neither the world government nor the authorities of the countries and their folks may issue any decisions or regulations of their own, without the entire population of the planet having voted on them and considered something to be right. As I explained, all countries, that is to say, their populations have a uniform planet-wide valid legislation and might of determination, as well as in regard to all other things which uniformly concern all folks. If authorities are elected by a folk, then this naturally only affects the respective folk, that is to say, its population, although the voting process remains the same as if a planet-wide vote were to take place.
So only the folk can determine who belongs to the folk's authority or to the world government?
This is actually the case, because also in this relationship alone such a process corresponds to a direct democracy.
Clearly, understandable.
Folk, Volk, das, minus es, FIGU, Kollekt, alle Menschen, die dieselbe Sprache, Kultur Geschichte haben, MST in einem Staat zusammenleben.
All human beings, who have the same language, culture and histories, and mostly live together in a country.
Nur es geht. Alle Einwohner, Bürger eines Landes oder Staates gleich Bevölkerung.
Only singular. All inhabitants, citizens of a land or country equals population.
Nur es geht. Die unteren sozialen Schichten der Bevölkerung.
Only singular. The lower social classes of the population.
Nur es geht. Viele Menschen an einem Ort gleich Menschenmenge, die Leute.
Only singular. Casual, many human beings in a ordinance equals human crowds, the people.
P. Verwendet, Gruppe von Menschen zu bezeichnen, deren Verhalten oder Tätigkeiten man tadelt oder verurteilt.
Pejorative. Used, in order to describe a group of human beings, whose mannerisms or activities one criticizes or prejudges.
Junges V. Gleich junge Leute, Jugendliche.
Youth folk. Casual equals young people, youth.
Das auserwählte V. Gleich real, die Juden.
The chosen folk equals religious, the Jews.
Fahrendes V. Veraltet gleich Artisten, ist Zirkus o Schausteller.
Traveling folk. Archaic equals artists, of a circus or similar, showman, traveling performer. Examples.
Volkslied.
An old, mostly relatively simple song, which became handed down in the folk.
Volksmund.
In the folk how it is orally passed down. Wise here. Wise is used in the sense of a guiding or leading way. Etymology.
Wiesenart. A. Weisen, führen, rufen, bringen, einladen.
Wise or.
Wise.
Old Scotty. To guide, to lead, to direct something, to train. One who is wise, is a great candidate for guiding, leading, directing, or training.
Landsgemeinde
or cantonal assembly is a public, non-secret ballot voting system operating by majority rule, which constitutes one of the oldest forms of direct democracy. Still at use in a few places at the subnational political level in Switzerland, it was formerly practiced in 8 cantons.